Mr. Thivendram, Mr. Kasupillai, Navaratnam, Mr. Katirgesan, and Mr. Rajendram with their families regularly brought their car to Kolumbathurai to take Swami for rides. When devotees came to see him at his hut, Swami asked them to sing, and he almost always joined in. His voice was still strong. Sometimes they sang for 2 or 3 hours. Once upon arriving at a devotee's house, he asked that certain parts of the Shiva Puranam be sung. They sang and sang, reveling in the presence of the Guru. Nagendran, a devotee who visited Yogaswami during his final months, offered the following narrative. My uncle Shivanathan and I went to Kolumbathurai a few months before Swami's Mahasamadhi. It was about 8 p.m., and Yogar was seated on a bed. A white shawl covered his loins. His upper body was bare. The silver hair was a bit rumpled. His face was gaunt and his eyes sunken. His 2 arms were placed behind him to support his weight as he turned back. The room was flooded with electric light. I have a picture of Yogar from this day in my shrine room. As Uncle Shiva and I paid our obeisances to him, devotional songs burst out of his lips. The songs were loud and clear and resonated around the room. He sang for about 10 minutes. His eyes sparkled and love poured out from them and suffused his face. I have never forgotten this, and never will. Everything is golden. Near the end of January, Swami became disinterested in going out to the beach, or anywhere for that matter, and limited his wheelchair travels to short distances. Ratnaman Navaratnam shares, it was during this period that he became accessible to all, being confined to his ashram. Devotees sought him in large numbers, and with infinite patience and love he meted out inconspicuously his sanctifying grace. He extended his healing touch in his own peculiar technique of hot and cold compresses, and took upon himself the still sad music of humanity. He generated a force that never was on sea or land, and electrified all those who for one reason or another flocked to him by his soul-stirring Nachintanai songs and homely discourses. Thus his accident was looked upon by his devotees as an outlet for the outpouring of God's grace. In the last phase of his earthly life, Swami taught the supreme sovereignty of the Lord's will. His will prevails within and without. Abide in his will was his insistent plea. He remained mentally alert. Just a month before his grand departure, he was visited by Mr. Ampikaipakan. While approaching the compound, the former principal of Vatheeswaran College mused that Swami's mental state must be sadly diminished, and wondered how he would converse with him. Entering the hut, he heard Swami laugh heartily and call out, "Can you remember, Ampikaipakan, 15 years ago when I shouted at that man in your presence just opposite the Vatheeswaran temple?" The principal was delighted that Swami was as keen as ever. T. Shiva Yogapathy shares the story of the blessing his father received from Swami during this time. Just a few weeks prior to the Mahasamadhi of Swami, as usual, his devotee and confidant, Mr. A. Thilampalam, visited Swami's hermitage. After they conversed for a while, Swami's tone turned serious. "Thilampalam, there are many people in this world counting money day and night, calculating their respective bank balances, and leading an unhappy life. But nobody in this world can touch or calculate your bank balance, because it is something unique, which is the value of your charity and large-hearted service to the community. Charity for the deserving is noble Shivathandu." So saying, Swami blessed his devotee with a kind smile. Swami seemed to assume that everyone was in the same realm as he was. That was the magic of the last days. He would talk to them into unseen beings, the devas or even the deities, as if they were all together on one plane of existence. He would tell a devotee to take an unseen being for a ride in his car. The devotee, accustomed to doing precisely what Swami asked of him, now just didn't know how. Feeling helpless, he would murmur, "Swami, I don't see anyone there." Swami would answer, "Surely you do. He's right there, standing beside you. Just take him on a short ride and bring him back." The fellow had no choice but to take what he considered an imaginary being to his car, open the door for him, close the door, go around and get in the car and drive away. If he neglected his task in any way, such as not opening the door for the being, Yogaswami would shout out, "Well, you didn't open the door. He's standing in the road. Back up your car and let him in." Swami sent many devotees off with these beings. Once he sent someone to the cremation grounds with an invisible guest. The man had no choice but to follow Swami's bidding. If he did not, Swami would know and would send him off again to do so. On one occasion he asked a devotee to take a deva home for tea. The man dutifully went to his home and, rather embarrassed, announced to his wife, "I have brought a companion for tea. Please prepare some tea for us." Sometimes people would lose courage and just drive around in their car for a while and then come back. One man came back having done this, and Swami said, "He says you didn't give him any tea. You'd better take him again for tea." They were wonderful times, and everyone loved them, even if they were confusing. Swami also seemed to be in the constant company of an unseen child. He would ask a devotee to take the child and walk it around. "Oh, this baby needs to go to sleep. Here, my son, take him, walk him to sleep." The devotee would hold out his arms, and Swami would carefully hand the child to him. "Be very careful," he would urge. "Make sure he goes to sleep." Or he might ask someone to feed the infant. "He's hungry, see that he has a little cup of milk." When someone asked, "Swami, this is a soul child, isn't it?" Or, "Swami, this child is the infant Murugan, isn't it?" he would just ignore the query. Swami engaged in planning a store during these final days. "We'll have a store. We'll give people everything they want, won't we? And we won't make a profit, not even a penny's profit, will we?" He spent days and days planning the store. When they asked, "Swami, is this a metaphysical store?" he ignored the question. Their queries must have seemed as strange to him as his plans were to them. To him, the distinction between different realms of mind had faded. The veil between the inner and outer worlds no longer was perceived. All was one, right there in the moment, completely available. With just an oil lamp burning, the room seemed to glow with an inner light, and there was an inexplicable coolness in the air. At any moment he might become transfixed, apparently oblivious to those around him. Once, while in this state, he talked aloud to Mother Thayalnayaki. His face took on the look of a small boy, radiant with the love that was coming from the Mother Spirit. He whispered his praise of that love and spoke elatedly of the energy he felt in her presence. Then he was with Chalapa Swami. He talked to his guru, telling of his work and saying that he wasn't ready to come with him yet. People who were with Swami at this time said that his face showed that he still assumed the role of disciple, while with his Chalapa guru, open and receptive. For a long time he sat motionless, his expression blissfully effulgent. Everyone's ears rang with the highest inner sounds, penetrating yet gentle. After a while he came back into the presence of those sitting around him, and asked if they had been with him. Had they seen what he had just seen? Then he told of that wondrous world. Everything is golden. There is a soft and self-luminous light beyond anything you can imagine. A few days before Swami's Mahasamadhi, a devotee placed an offering of fruit and flowers at Swami's feet and worshipped him. Swami handed the offering to another devotee with instructions. "Take this and do an abhishekam in the Nalur temple." Yogaswami leaves his body. Swami became confined to his bed on March 20th, 1964, refused to drink or eat anything, and told doctors to stay away. An alarm went out that he was failing. He barely moved all day, and when awake talked to himself in the tones of a child. Many people gathered around. Though emotionally distraught, they sang quietly or chanted. All were visibly saddened by Swami's imminent departure. The next 3 days saw a steady stream of devotees coming for his darshan, praying, seeking final blessings from their beloved master, knowing that he might leave his body at any moment. Every so often, Swami withdrew completely into his inner world. His temperature dropped and his pulse rate slowed, sometimes nearly stopping altogether, which alarmed the doctors. In this state he kept only a tenuous hold on his body. On the night of March 23rd, about 15 devotees sat quietly at Swami's bedside, singing in turns. At about 10 p.m., a devotee arrived who had always had a direct channel to Swami. It was Dr. S.A. Vitivelu, who had gone daily to the ashram to monitor Swami's blood pressure, as well as his blood sugar level, and to give a daily insulin injection. Without hesitation, he approached and asked, "How are you feeling, Swami?" "Alam Sari, everything is fine." Swami answered in a full voice. Hearing these words, most of the devotees thought he had made a turn for the better and departed. By 11:30 p.m., 5 remained: Dr. S.A. Vedivelu, Mr. A. Thilampalam, Mr. Kasipillai Navaratnam, Mr. K. Brahmamananda, and Mr. Tirunavukarasu. As soon as the crowd had departed, the feeling in the room changed from one of emotional upset to a peace hardly describable. Swami was quiet. At one point, he spoke softly, indicating he wanted those around him to sing. They sang 2 songs Swami had always sung at profound moments: Engal Gurunathan, written by Swami, and Samashiva Valka, an ancient hymn by Saint Manikavasagar. At 3:18 on the morning of Monday, March 24th, 1964, Yogaswami released his body. Those present reported losing all consciousness and being consumed in a Shakti so intense and pervading that it overshadowed every other experience of their lives. Death's approach reminds us that life on earth is temporary. All our possessions, power, and ego will end. Seeing this truth, the Shaivite Hindus of Jaffna were schooled to turn the mind toward God, toward life's ultimate goal, moksha, liberation, and toward the path of Dharma with all that will take the soul there. They did this not in trepidation, but in assurance, faith, and gratitude for the opportunity to progress spiritually in this physical incarnation. Death is defined differently according to what people believe themselves to be. If they are only the body and brain, as with humanists or atheists, then death is the end of sensory experience, and thus of self. If we live once, death ends our only sojourn on earth, and is naturally dreaded. If we are born again and again, it loses its dread in light of the soul's pilgrimage to eternity. No matter how ill, how infirm our condition, there is a serene and consoling center of our being to which we can adjourn, the source within. It is more us than our body, more us than our mind and emotion. It will not die. It does not hurt or fear. As physical debility and death draw us near, we seek this center, whether we call it Param Atman, God, self, or divine consciousness. In the Katha Upanishad, Yama, Lord of Death, explains, "Death is a mere illusion which appears to those who cannot grasp absolute reality. The soul is immortal, self-existent, self-luminous, and never dies." Shiva Subramania Swami would later describe the process. In Shaiva Siddhanta philosophy, it is the soul's subtle body, Linga Sharira, that stores the thought energy, experiential impressions of life, called samskaras. When the body dies, this non-physical sheath continues as a constellation of subtle elements, dispositions, memories, desires, etc. It is within this subtle body that the soul reincarnates. If necessary, death, according to Hinduism, is not the contradiction of life. Death and birth are 2 sides of life's cosmic cycle. The culmination of that cycle is liberation. As Yogaswami taught, by getting rid of desire, man can put an end to birth altogether. Many who have had a near-death experience speak of having come back to complete unfinished obligations to children, parents, or friends. It is a great blessing to know of one's impending transition. A Hindu approaching death works diligently to finish all his business of this lifetime, the allotted portion of his total karma carried into this birth to face and resolve. If death comes while loose ends remain, misunderstandings unresolved, misdeeds unatoned for, or obligations unfulfilled, another lifetime may be required to expire that karma. Thus it was not unusual in those and later days to see an aging or ailing Hindu going around to friends and enemies, giving love, help, and blessings, working to resolve conflicts and differences, offering apologies and fulfilling all known obligations. In modern times, he would also execute execute his own will, distribute his properties and duties to heirs, charities, and endowments, not leaving such tasks to others. That done, the soon-to-transition soul turns to God, reads scriptures, attends the temple, and amplifies meditation and devotion. He may pilgrimage to sacred spots or retire to a secluded place to practice japa and yoga sadhanas. The family takes care not to disturb these efforts, nor his retirement from social obligation or interaction, realizing he has entered life's final stage, that of renunciation or sannyasa. Swami had given hints about the time of his death and shared thoughts about leaving this world, a devotee recalls. About 3 months before Swami's Mahasamadhi, we used to go quite often to him, and he used to often ask the time, "Is it 3 o'clock? When it's 3 o'clock I must get out, so tell me when it's 3. He used to always leave at 3 o'clock. Someone's car would come to him at about that time, and he would go. One day he said, 'I have done everything. Nobody must blame me. I have done everything for everyone. I have made arrangements for you all.' And he made a bow, a sort of farewell gesture. Finally, it was at 3 a.m. that he passed away. Later, only we connected the facts, his always asking for the time. He was preparing for the final journey. Swami prepared everyone for his great departure, telling them that to him the body was unimportant. 'Just throw it away when I have left it,' he said to some. 'I have done everything that I have to do for more than 50 years. I have said everything that I have to say. I have no regrets.' He said he did not need his physical body to do his work or manifest his presence, and he told of a time when people all over the world would know him and feel the blessing of the Guru. The following account of the funeral was published in Hindu Sadhanam under the title Light of Jaffna. On Tuesday, the 24th of March 1964, devotees, school students, and others paid homage to his holy body in Kolumbathurai ashram. Devotees in groups sang Tirumurai, Tamil prayer songs, and Nachintanai songs with melodious music. On the 25th of March 1964, Wednesday early morning about 5 a.m., they did Abhishekam with devotion to Swamigal's body. Swamigal's body was covered with pure white cloth and flower garlands. His body was carried in a square box decorated with flower strings. Devotees carried it through Kolumbathurai Street to Thundi cremation grounds. The procession route was decorated with leaves and flowers. The people living in the streets paid homage with lighted oil lamps and water pots in front of their homes and sang bhajan songs. About 9 o'clock the procession reached the funeral grounds. Thousands of people gathered to see the cremation. Volunteers arranged men and women to sit separately. There was silence, and it was peaceful. The body was placed on a wooden stack, which included 1/4 ton of sandalwood. Everybody was meditating on the grace of Yoga Swamigal and their blessing to live in the same time as such a great Siddha lived in this world. Kokuvil Mr. T. Kumaraswamy Pulavar recited devotedly Tiruvasagam songs and one Puranam. Then the body was ritually lighted. Everybody loudly shouted, Arahara, and worshipped the light. Sinhalese brothers, Muslims, and Christians also were there to pay their respects. Like this, everybody watched Swamigal merge with light. The piece looked like earthly Kailash. The following description was given by V. Muthukumaraswamy. Never did Jaffna see a larger crowd, so many devotees of various faiths coming to pay last homage to the sage of Kolumbathurai. Hundreds of devotees were in attendance. It seemed as if all of Jaffna was there. Many who had feared to visit him all their lives for what they thought he might expose to them now paid homage to the sacrificial life of this saint. It was a solemn affair. Many were unable to contain their emotion. Even though they knew that the soul is immortal, from childhood their scriptures and teachings had taught that there is no real death, that the soul merely passes from body to body on its pilgrimage to God, and they knew that Swami was surely enjoying the bliss of liberation from samsara. They were crying more for their loss of Swami's presence and the emptiness they felt. Sri Ananda Pereira gave the following eulogy in the Shivathandan. Most people are takers, some, a very few, are givers. Yoga Swami was a giver par excellence. His whole life was one long act of giving. I had the good fortune to meet him in 1952 and again in 1963. Time and a sad accident had wrought their inevitable changes in the interval. He who had been strong and well was now weak and virtually bedridden, dependent on others for even the most elementary physical needs. The eyes that had been so bright and piercing were now dim. The voice had lost its resonance. The once steady hands now trembled, and pain carved lines on the noble face. He was living proof of the law of change to which all beings, even the highest, are subject. But I soon found that that flame of his heroic spirit still burned as brightly as ever. The dim eyes could still probe deep into the human heart. The voice had still the ring of authority. The trembling hand still held the scepter of true royalty. He was still the giver, and I the receiver. What did he give? Peace, strength, hope, courage, and many other gifts too numerous to mention. But above all, he gave love. It radiated from him as light and warmth radiate from the sun. What did I receive? As much as I was capable of receiving. Take a little mug and stand under a waterfall. You emerge stunned by the impact of the water. But how much do you bring away? One little mugful. Ratnama Navaratnam echoed. For about 92 years, Swami was like a luminous ray reflecting the radiance of the Shaiva saints down the ages. The Jaffna community in whose midst he lived and moved had grown imperceptibly to accept his presence as naturally as the beneficent sunlight, so that his Mahasamadhi on March 24, 1964, created an unusual stir and sorrow among all ranks of people who had basked in his luster from generation to generation. Swami was venerated as an illumined seer of the 20th century, one who was God's witness on earth, a saint in whom the sacred was secret. He was like the Triveni, a confluence where met the streams of past, present, and future. He seemed to have held the whole world in the kinship of the supreme will of Shiva. The Master Shiva Thandan blazoned the trail of service and renunciation. By his universal gospel of Shiva Thandu, service unto Shiva, to live every split second as servitors of Shiva, was his clarion call to the modern man. After the cremation, Swami's ashes were kept in the new ashram. Feeling that a proper samadhi shrine should be created, Mr. Tirunavukarasu, owner of the ashram land, consulted with 3 senior devotees of Swami, Dr. C. Guruswami, Mr. A. Thilyampalam, and Mr. Srikantha, and they together decided to take down the old hut and designate the spot as a samadhi shrine. Funds were raised by the Shivathandan Society, and in the coming months work commenced on a new structure on top of the old concrete flooring. A large alcove was created in the perimeter wall on the west side of the building, above where Swami's ashes would be kept in a crypt below ground, and a formal shrine facing east was established above it. The shrine was completed within a few months, and the ashes were placed in the crypt during a small, informal ceremony. There his sandals are kept, and a priest does puja daily. The area where Swami used to sit, meditate, and sleep is also a place of worship. Behind it, against the wall, a large photo of Swami is enshrined, the one that was taken of him meditating. The priest does puja here as well. The area where he sat is demarcated with white ceramic tile. There flowers are spread each day and offerings are made. Swami lives on. Some think that when a realized, liberated soul leaves his body, he is automatically released from further reincarnation on earth. While this may be true for most, it is also said that liberated ones have a choice whether to come back again and serve. That possibility is suggested by the following story told by Yogaswami to a devotee. Many years ago in Nallur, Chalapaguru's birth star happened to fall on the day before Muhammad's birthday, and Chalapar took Swami to Nallur temple, ushering him to a tomb where a great Muslim guru had been buried at the temple. The temple was destroyed by the Portuguese. Initially, a shrine had been built around his burial site. The samadhi was reconstructed sometime later. Yogaswami said Chalapar told him the Muslim saint who was buried there was Chalapar. In other words, Chalapaguru had held that body before as a liberated guru and had returned to earth again as Chalapar. While narrating the story, Yogaswami looked his devotee in the eye and said, "That is the kind we are." Even during Yogaswami's earthly life, many devotees saw him appear in his subtle body. After his passing, people in India and Malaysia, Sri Lanka, and America had similar experiences. Since then, many have seen Swami's etheric form, as it was when he walked on earth. Even those who never knew him in his physical form have experienced his unembodied darshan. Close devotees have seen him in quiet moments. He has manifested himself in their meditations, giving just the things they needed to keep focused on their spiritual work. Several months after Swami's Mahasamadhi, a man in Jaffna felt a subtle, inexplicable change in his home during the night. It was a feeling so strong that he could not dismiss it. He got up to investigate, and after checking several places, entered his shrine room. There was Yogaswami, just as in the famous photo, sitting in meditation, luminous and clear as day, 1 meter above the floor. The man worshipped, then went to call his wife and children to come. When they arrived, the figure was just fading into the wall, but they saw it too. Other households had the same experience. Devotees who knew Yogaswami have told of hearing his voice as clearly as when he was with them physically. One day, not long after his passing, a lady who had been close to Swami went to his compound and sat down in the simple hut. She missed him deeply and was sad over her loss. She began singing a song she had sung for Swami many times to invoke the fulfillment she had felt when she was there with him. Partway through the song, she stopped and sat quietly. Then she heard Swami speak as clearly as ever before. "I am as I always have been. I am here, there, and everywhere. Have no thought of sadness." Swami often came to devotees in dreams during this time. Some who had problems that they would have taken to Swami for his advice had such dreams in which he gave the solution. In some dreams, devotees vividly experienced the intense presence of his Shakti as if they were sitting with him. These profound encounters inspired and gave them direction. Little by little, this kind of experience subsided. After 1968, he became less immediate and active. He now lives totally on subtle planes of the mind, emanating Shakti. A person has to make a deeper pilgrimage to be with him. In 1972, Satguru Shivaya Subramaniya Swami revealed from his mystical perspective in Shaivite Shastras how Yogaswami lives in a simple cavern, and that was his association with the inside of a small room in his ashram in Sri Lanka. He could make it larger with but a twinkling of the eye, but he sits there in deep samadhi, radiating darshan to the sanctified places that do puja in his name. When a puja is conducted in his name, his wall opens up and he is at the puja. He does not go to it, it comes to him. If the vibration of the puja penetrates deeply enough, Subramaniya Swami also encouraged his own disciples to learn and sing Nachintanai, often noting that Yogaswami attends in the inner worlds when devotees sing his songs. All through his life, Yogaswami foresaw the emergence of monistic Shaiva Siddhanta in the West, especially in the United States. He told close devotees that there had always been Shiva worship on the American continent. He once explained that a group of ancient people living on the Colorado River basin near the Grand Canyon worship Shiva with as much understanding as the ancient seers of India. Swami foretold of a time in the near future when many highly evolved Hindus would be born in America to restore the purity of ancient Shaivite worship on earth. Thus would be ushered in a new age of profound spiritual life on the planet. During his life, Yogaswami purified the way called Advaita Siddhanta, or monistic Shaiva Siddhanta. Where there were rough edges, he made the path clear and sharp. He embodied the beauty and the depths of the transcendence of Shiva. Now in Jaffna and in India, Yogaswami is remembered as the modern saint of Shaiva Siddhanta, the being whose life harmonized the reality of ancient Shaivite worship with the present era. Swami would allow no fuss about the divine plan as it revealed itself before those who sat around him, observing and enacting their parts in it. To him it was completely natural and unworthy of special notice. To people who were astonished by what they saw unfolding in front of them, he would say, "There is nothing amazing in the world. Your ignorance shows when you find this amazing. It all happened long, long ago. What can be wonderful?" he would ask. "I am you, and you are me. I am eternal, birthless, deathless, changeless, secondless." One day a lady asked, "Swami, you are getting older now. Are you going to make a guru to take your place?" Yogaswami answered, "Not a Jaffna man. I have a man in America." Chapter 19, Subramania's Youth. The first mystical experience I can remember was a baby lying in my crib. It had little bars up so you couldn't fall out. All of a sudden I was conscious of a tall, full-grown man standing over me in a serene, pale yellow robe. Then I became fully conscious of being this full-grown man looking down upon this little baby. Then I was conscious as the baby again, looking up into the face of this great soul. And then I was the tall person. Then I was the little baby looking at the tall person. It went back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth. I realized that the tall man in the pale yellow robe was the body of the soul. I realized that as I continued maturing spiritually, the soul body would finally fully inhabit the physical body. That infant, Robert Walter Hansen, who would later become Satguru Shivaya Subramania Swami, was born at the Fabiola Hospital in Oakland, California on January 5, 1927, to Walter and Alberta Neild Hansen. He was raised with his younger sister Carol in a cabin on the secluded, forested shores of Fallen Leaf Lake near Lake Tahoe, California. Walter, a taciturn man, was a native Californian whose parents were both from Denmark, and Alberta was born in Kansas of an English-born father. His mother and father were somewhat secretively involved with the medical school at Stanford University, though their life as caretakers of a remote log cabin lodge gave little indication of why. Mysteriously, the medical school paid for all his mother's funeral expenses when she died. Robert was never privy to what happened at Stanford, as his description of those days would later reveal. There is actually no proof of this, but I've always felt from different hints and things that were said that I was an experimental baby, which they used to call at that time a test tube baby. I grew up with those thoughts in my mind. I believe that Grace Burrows, who adopted me in dance and as a son, knew of my father's cooperation with the research department of Stanford University Medical Center. Those were the days when artificial insemination or test tube babies were only a concept and in the experimental stage. I remember at birth looking up at Dr. Chapeau, a Frenchman, a neighbor of ours, and to this day feeling him as being close to me as a father. He reflected late in life that his lifelong dispassionate nature, a powerful sense of detached innerness, might have been the result of the unemotional manner of his conception and birth. Life was bucolic for the small family. The wild and remote Lake Tahoe area was one of America's most beautiful regions, and tourists flocked to the rough-hewn lodge in summertime. Walter and Alberta were the host caretakers, looking after the guests and the upkeep of the resort. But winters at 6,377 feet are severe, and the Hansens were alone for many months of the year, surrounded by old-growth fir and pine trees and snow 4 to 10 feet deep. They passed the seasons this way for years, far from the nearest neighbor, dependent on carefully garnered stores of canned foods and cords of firewood stockpiled before winter set in. Despite the desolate location, the children had lots of attention, gifts, and toys. There were always huge piles of presents under the Christmas tree. At family gatherings, they were surrounded emotionally by 20 or 30 relatives, and both children had photographs taken almost weekly throughout their early years. Robert was 3 years older than Carol and became her companion, caretaker, and babysitter. He would make snowmen for her, instruct her in the fine art of snow travel on a wooden sled called Scudabog down the gentle slopes behind the lodge, and teach her the ways of the forest which he had himself only recently learned. Brother and sister attended a one-room log-built schoolhouse in which 23 students, of every age from 6 to 16, were taught by the same teacher. Their only wintertime connection to civilization was occasional mail and an old radio that brought them news and those sound effects-laden soap operas sponsored by oil companies and Ovaltine. Robert spent most of his time playing. His father tried to interest him in carpentry, building a table, obtaining tools, but he wasn't interested. He liked running barefoot in the snow, boating, skiing, and snowshoeing in the winter. He played mostly on the trails and paths, or in the woods. In the summertime, Robert would swim out to a rock in the lake and meditate. He would stretch out on his back and go within until he felt he became the rock. Looking up, he would experience God pervading the sky and the rock and all that was around him. I'm all right now. Among Robert's favorite radio shows was The Lone Ranger, a serial adventure that was broadcast from 1933 to 1954. In the story, a heroic masked Texas Ranger gallops on his horse Silver to right injustices, helped by his clever Indian partner Tonto. The weekly half-hour was addictively popular, with kids eager to be enthralled, among them the Hanson duo, who never missed an episode. One cold December day in the early 1930s, Robert's father took his son on a supply errand to the village of South Lake Tahoe, 3 miles away, to pick up the mail and stock the family pantry. They had a custom-made truck, black in color, as all automobiles were in that day, that had 2 large skis mounted in front instead of tires, and dual-wheel metal snow tracks in the rear, so they could drive on top of the lightly packed snows without a need for roads. It had a fabric roof, no side windows, and the back was an open flatbed for carrying supplies. On this day, father and son were running late, and that was not good. This was the evening. The Lone Ranger would be aired, and it was unthinkable that an episode would be missed. But the unthinkable was happening. It was a moment the young boy would remember the rest of his life. Quite often the snowmobile would become stuck in the snow. This might delay us an hour or two as my father worked to release it so that we could proceed. Each time we went to the village on the way home, I observed my thinking faculty being disturbed and worried for fear that we would not arrive home in time for me to listen to my favorite radio program. I hated to miss the sequence of the program, such as Captain Midnight, The Lone Ranger, and Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy. This was the first time I became aware in the area of the mind that always worries. There I was, though, and I didn't like it. I clearly remember mentally talking to myself and saying, "You are all right now. We haven't gotten stuck in the snow yet, have we?" At that early age, I actually saw awareness coming out of the area of the mind that always worries and entering a total consciousness of here and now. Then awareness would leave the now and go into the past, and I would begin to think, 4 days ago we were delayed in the snow for about an hour, and my father had a very difficult time digging out the snowmobile. I saw my awareness travel into the past. Then I would repeat even more firmly to myself, "I am all right now. We are not delayed yet." And again, I actually saw awareness travel right back to the present moment. This became one of my hobbies. The totality of the power of the eternity of the moment began to become stronger and stronger within me from that time onward, until whenever anything came along in the mind substance, I was able to handle it and work it out right from the now, instead of having my intelligence drift off into the future and try to work it out from the perspective or backtrack into the past and try to find a resolution there. All this and even more unfolded to me at that early age in such a beautiful and simple way. Young Robert's mind seemed to take the best out of every experience, even then, but not all those early experiences were amenable to his gift. Church-going was culturally mandated in those days, and the children were no exception. He would ask the minister questions, but the minister would not answer. "So why should I go?" he challenged his mother. She talked to the minister, who obligingly conceded. "Please don't force him to come." The compromise of non-attendance seemed acceptable to all, and Robert's church and Sunday school days halted abruptly. Orphaned. When Robert was 9, his mother, who had all his life been a vivacious and adventurous woman, who loved nature and plucked herbs from her own garden, took ill. He helped care for her, even in times of delirium. In July of 1937, she came under the care of Dr. Malcolm Haddon in Berkeley. As the months wore on, her condition grew more grave, and by early November she was admitted to an Oakland hospital. On November 11, 1937, Alberta died of cerebral arteriosclerosis and chronic myocarditis, leaving the children 10 and 7 in her husband's sole care. She was cremated. Grace Burroughs, an intimate friend of the family who lived nearby with her husband, took over the job of mothering the children. Walter, alone and burdened by his wife's death, raised Robert and Carol with Grace's help. Life in those backwoods parts is hard enough when shared by a fit couple, but overwhelming when one is left with all the responsibilities. The family fared the winter as well as one might expect, but things were never the same. Walter grew morose, feeling the weight of his children's needs as any father would. He began drinking heavily, making the rounds of Nevada casino bars with his children in tow. This was to be Robert's first lesson on the powerful impact of sorrow. One day, months after his wife's death, Walter was driven, for reasons unknown, to take a belt to his son. That beating would never be forgotten, and the two hardly spoke from that day, so traumatized was Robert by the cruel strapping. On December 9, 1938, Walter left the home to drive into town with Bill Burke, a local stonemason. The weather was bad, and their truck was sideswiped, forcing it off the road and into a tree. Burke was killed instantly, but Walter managed to drag himself away, his chest crushed and both legs broken. A neighbor carried Walter back to the cabin, and that night, they drove him to a hospital in Reno. Doctors worked to heal his fractured legs and ribs, but as the days passed he began to fail, and finally succumbed to pneumonia on December 14th at age 50. Walter's estate went into a trust for the children. The funeral was held in Auburn, California, where Walter's parents had been buried. Though the family begged him, Robert refused to attend. Days before his 12th birthday, he was an orphan. I can remember being hit twice in my life, once with a ruler, 2 hits on the open palms, then the father with a belt once. After that, I would have nothing to do with him. I refused to go to his funeral. Later in life, when asked about his youth by his monastics, he shared, "As a boy, I was disappointed by adults and said to myself, I'm never going to listen to anyone older than myself. And at the time, being an orphan, you could do whatever you want to. That's the one good thing about being an orphan. You don't have to listen to anybody. So I listened to my own inner self and decided that I wanted to dance. And why was that? Because I was told God danced. Nataraja danced. I had already been taught pranayama, basic hatha yoga, when I was 8 or 9 years of age. Then during my teens I learned attention, concentration, and meditation." He was referring to the summers he spent with Grace Burroughs at her school of dance at Fallen Leaf Lake, in which his father enrolled him during the summer following Alberta's death. Grace, an elegant, round-faced woman with an oriental look, born in Nebraska in 1895, had spent 3 years in the mid-20s touring the world with the Denishwan dancers, and a year or more in India as a palace guest of the Maharaja of Mysore, studying Indian dance, customs, art, and philosophy. I want to dance. Grace trained Robert in Indian and European dance, Indian culture, and the fine art of meditation. This cultural discovery enchanted Robert, and the artistry and discipline of dance absolutely mesmerized him. It gave him a purpose, a goal, his first as a young adult, and he threw himself into it with all his heart. Decades later, he recalled, "About the age of 10 or 11, I became aware of what I wanted to do when I grew up. I want to dance, I said. This came from deep within me. Music always moved the inner energy of the inner body, and finally the muscles moved and the body would begin to dance. Dance, incidentally, in Hinduism is considered the highest form of expression. That is why dance was used for worship in temples of ancient cultures. Through the esoteric forms of dance, you become acquainted with the movements of the currents of the physical body, the emotional body, and the body of the soul. The meditating dancer, inspired by music, finds the inner currents moving first, and lastly the physical body. This releases his awareness into inner superconscious realms of the mind in a smooth, rapid, and systematic way. I started my life in the dance as the dance and being the dance. The young artist was eager to learn, and Mrs. Burroughs was thrilled to have a focused student. She decided to teach him the Manipuri dance of India, a traditional style that depicts the forces of the natural world. Grace Burrows, my first catalyst, was keenly interested in dance and in all the cultural arts of India. She was the first to bring an interest for Indian things to the West, mainly San Francisco, which was then a real center of culture. She brought artists over for concerts. She taught me the yogic and cultural practices she had been introduced to in India, in palace-like surroundings where religious Hindu music was constantly playing, meals served on trays, saris worn, and the Mysore tradition carried forward, promulgated and taught in a royal and dramatic way. By the time I was 12 years of age, I knew how to eat with my hands, how to put on a dhoti, how to wrap a turban. This was my dress for the year to follow. I learned how to dance. Manipuri dance was taught at that time. She also carefully trained me in concentration and meditation. We would have to sit for hours in her chalet and look at the calm, glass-like lake and equate it with the calm of mind devoid of thought. We would also meditate after the ceremony of lighting the lights that surrounded the fire altar that I was trained to dance before, as fire itself moved to the music, as the wind and breath of air moved the fire. I was taught how to meditate on the cosmos. That was a big word for me in those days. The stars, the galaxy, Lord Shiva, the creator, preserver, and destroyer of all mankind and all things. Lord Shiva, God, raised foot, dancing to drums, the Tandava dance that I had learned the last year. I was introduced to Shiva with Nataraja images. Those early impressions, remain in your mind along with all the long stories and conversations about India and the culture of India. The school had large collections of Indian fabrics and saris and dhotis and artifacts and so forth that I was exposed to. Grace taught him much. She took to softly disciplining the boy when needed, not directly, but by leaving handwritten corrections in an agreed-upon niche in the stone altar. Robert would go there now and again, read her note, and adjust accordingly, all very civilized. We never had a personal confrontation or correction. She always chastised me by leaving a note in a sacred place for me to read. Embarrassingly, I read it, took it within myself, and corrected myself. After his father died, Robert moved almost completely into Grace's world. Grace, an initiated Rosicrucian who knew much of the occult sciences, recognized the spiritual element in his dancing. In her presence, Robert's unfoldment began. It was to be completely different from his earlier years. They understood each other. She was fantastically eccentric, a real-life Auntie Mame. Grace wanted to become the guardian of the Hanson children, but the relatives, aware of the eccentricities of the artiste, would not hear of it. Instead, they appointed Robert's Aunt Helen, whom he liked. She was a refined lady and a Christian Scientist. When Helen realized she did not have the means to raise them, she found a family from her church. The couple, Melville and Flora Hamilton, continued the children's upbringing in their Oakland Hills home, replete with beautiful gardens and a pond, from 1939 onwards. The children were given a background in Christian Science, and from it Robert learned of the healing powers of the mind, of the innerness of the spiritual path, and of religious tolerance. Nevertheless, Grace Burrows was the most influential force in young Robert's life after his father's death. She whisked him away to spend summers at her dance school at Fallen Leaf Lake, in a chalet she named Beau Rêve, Beautiful Dream. The rest of the year he could frequently be found at her place in Berkeley. She taught Robert Eastern dress and culture, as well as Manipuri dance and ballet from age 9 to 14. Grace also trained me to be a teacher of small children, 4, 5, 6, and 7 years of age, and behold, I was on the faculty of the Grace Burrows School of Dance. I must say, at that early age, I taught them well. They responded beautifully from what they learned, and I learned in teaching them. Finally, after I had absorbed everything I had to learn from my first catalyst, she introduced me to my second catalyst, Hilda Charlton, who patiently taught me how to center the whole being of the physical body, the emotional body, and the spiritual body, so that the inner light began to appear. With this catalyst, in Berkeley, California, I had my first inner light experience. Then I am God. Hilda Charlton was deeply devotional and meditated regularly. She was psychically awakened and had premonitions of Robert's going deeper and deeper into the teachings. Shortly after they met, she asked the teenager, "Do you know who you are?" The question puzzled him, and after a while he had to admit that he did not. Then she said, "Next time you come back, I want you to tell me who you are." After thinking it over for a few days, he decided upon an intellectual answer taken from something he had heard in Christian Science. On his next visit, he told her, "I am a part of God." She remained silent, then said softly and slowly, "If you were a bubble on the ocean, which would depict being a part of God, and the bubble burst, what would you be?" She knew the answer was the ocean. But then the real meaning came to him with a burst of understanding from within, and he said somewhat wondrously, "Then I am God." I studied with my second catalyst twice a week during these 2 most wonderful years, never asking many questions. I just obeyed what was told to me to the very best of my ability. I was taught this at a very early age, not to ask any questions. I was told one must absorb inner teachings. One has to become aware of where the teacher is within himself and look at what he is saying from that perspective. This is the way that the student learns to absorb inner teachings. Then they awaken within him, and he complements them with his own inner knowing. My second catalyst also taught me how to see into the Akasha and view great actinic inner plane beings. My second catalyst was also well acquainted with various forms of mysticism, occultism, and meditation. She taught me exactly how one leaves the physical body after putting the body to sleep. I learned of the astral body and how to work with and develop the experience of leaving the physical body in the astral body, while totally aware of the happening. Turn around, look back at the physical body, see the silver cord which connects it to the astral body, and to travel astrally. This catalyst taught me how the inner energies of the 7 chakras function as the physical body moves and is inspired through the different types of music. She gave me a tremendous training and exercise in the free-form movement of the dance, in which one experiences no inhibitions of any kind. This was extremely good for me at the age of 14 and 15 because it controlled and transmuted the energies of the emotional area. Hilda Charlton drew Robert deeper into the mystical teachings, coming into his life at age 14. She was a deeply devotional person with natural mystical powers and premonitions. An exceptional teacher, she spent 7 years taking the young seeker deeper into the disciplines of concentration and meditation, bhakti yoga, and the art of giving. Later, she would travel with him to Ceylon. In 1945, as soon as he turned 18, Robert left his foster home and moved to San Francisco. Carol, who died in late 2007, stayed on until 1948. Brother and sister did not connect thereafter, and it was not until he was giving a book presentation at a Borders store in Redwood City, California in 2000 that they would see each other again and speak a few words. So complete was Robert's renunciation of his past. Even the gods will obey. Hilda Charlton introduced him to his third catalyst, her dear friend, spiritualist Cora Enright, known as Mother Christney, who would become the most influential teacher of his youth. In the years that followed, she brought him into karma, raja, and jnana yogas, taught him obedience and service to others, selflessness, and the inner light. Standing just 5'2", she did not quite reach Robert's shoulder, but she was larger than life, aristocratic, and outspoken. With snow-white hair, a cherubic face, and long flowing robes, she looked, some said, like an angel or fairy godmother. A kindly lady, she was also a tough teacher, demanding and sometimes domineering. She tested Robert severely and corrected him sternly, making him prove himself at every stage. He learned her ways and grew stronger in his spiritual commitments under her reign. She told her young charge, "When the spirit rises in command, even the gods will obey," and she schooled him in the arcane arts of spiritual leadership. He told of her style. Mother Christney would test all who came to her, requiring proof of their sincerity. If a person approached her wanting to study, she would hand them a credit card with no explanation. If they held it a moment and handed it back, she would move forward with them. If they took the card, turned it over, and looked at the reverse side, she would say nothing, but they would never be invited back. Mother Christney was like my Vishvaguru, teaching me all the ways of the world. Her Catholic background was completely unorthodox. At heart she was a spiritualist with immense psychic abilities. Though she had left the church, she had frequent visions of the saints and often shared her otherworldly conversations. She could regale conversations and individuals with tales of psychometry, aura readings, solar biology, ectoplasmic manifestations, and Christ consciousness. Mother Christney followed a mystical form of Christianity, one considered heretical to most Christians. It was an attempt to weave mystical truths, normally found in Eastern religions, into the structure of the more narrow Christian faith. Such mysticism was alive quite early in the Catholic Church's history, with the 3rd century philosopher Origen, and was reflected in more modern times in Rosicrucians, Theosophists, and Freemasons. In the century before Mother Christney's life, Christianity had morphed in America, giving rise to new churches, the Mormons in 1830, Seventh-day Adventists in 1863, Christian Science in 1866, the Church of Divine Science in 1880, Unity Church in 1889, and Religious Science, also called Science of Mind, in 1927. These last three are part of the New Thought movement, which emphasizes metaphysical beliefs concerning the law of attraction, healing, life force, creative visualization, personal power, and the ideas that infinite intelligence, or God, is ubiquitous, spirit is the totality of real things, the soul is divine, high-minded thought is a force for good, all sickness originates in the mind, and positive thinking has a healing effect. Her Christianity was not the traditional one. She took Robert to seances where the dead talked to the living, to theaters where performer spiritualists amazed disbelieving crowds by bringing disembodied souls onto the stage and conversing with them. Some of these spiritualists manifested gems or predicted the future. Others made it possible for the audience to hear faint voices from the spirit world, amplified through cone-shaped trumpets. It was another world, and she wanted the young seeker to see it all. He would never forget these scenes, and took his own followers to experience them decades later. She was amazingly connected with the spiritual personalities of her day. In 1934, her home was the temporary ashram of a Sri Lankan guru, Dayananda Priyadasi Daryl Paris, who brought with him the Buddhist path of enlightenment. His ways charmed Mother Christney and inspired her to explore the Eastern path all the more, learning much she would pass on to her favorite student. She also knew Yogi Hari Rama, who was then the rage. He had landed in San Francisco in 1924 and toured the U.S., demonstrating levitation and teleportation, something Americans had not seen. Though he showed these powers, he always stressed that they were not needed for deeper spiritual attainments. He taught yoga in her Oakland home and became her guru, bestowing on her the name Mother Christney. Mother Christney was closely associated with Paramahansa Yogananda, serving on the board of directors of his Self-Realization Fellowship. She studied Manly P. Hall and Edgar Cayce and met Indra Devi, who brought Hatha Yoga to Hollywood in the 1930s. Mother Christney was impressed with Swami Bhagawan Bisesar, who came to America from Benares and who wrote the following affirmation for his devotees. O thou the Absolute, the Infinite, the only reality, give me wisdom and faith, so I may open the portals to my illimitable powers. Om Tat Sat Om, the portal of my mind is now open to the inflow of spiritual knowledge. I am one with the Absolute, united and inseparable, and the help of the elder brothers is mine. These Indian yogis and swamis brought with them the teachings of reincarnation, of an all-pervasive divinity, of God within man, and man as being more of spirit than of body and mind. They taught the powers of pranayama and affirmation, the rigors of meditation, and the elevation of consciousness. Mother Krishna moved among them and absorbed the wisdom they brought from India and Ceylon, and that enabled her to ground her teenage prodigy in the subtleties of the Eastern path. Their relationship would span the next 24 years of Robert's life, beginning with her mentoring him in her vast encounters with religion and mystical teachings, and ending with his looking after a frail friend. During the mid-60s, he stayed at her Oakland home on weekdays, helping with housekeeping and shopping, returning to San Francisco on weekends to manage his temple. My third catalyst was wonderful and patient. She taught me the psychology of the vibratory rates of color and how to read an aura, understand the meaning of each color and combination of color within the aura, and how to equate them with the moods and emotions and thinking faculty of the person. She taught me a method of character delineation in the understanding of human nature, the way people think, the way they act, and the inner subconscious motivation. She told me about the Guru and said that one day I would meet my Guru, but before I met my Guru, I would have to realize the self. She told me that I would find my Guru on the island of Ceylon, and that I must go there and study, and that this was my next step. At that time, I was meditating 2 hours every day, right by the clock, just sitting there without moving, going in and in and in, trying to fathom the intricacies of what I had been learning, and the purity and simplicity of the self. In the second year of training, I was intricately taught to understand the actions and reactions of people, how they moved, how they thought, how they acted. I was taught to be so observant with the powers of concentration that I would actually know by the movement of the mind or physical body of someone all about their inner attitudes and how they lived at home. During the third year of training, I was taught how to test students inwardly and outwardly to determine if they were mystically inclined or just intellectually interested in the teaching. Then we went on into the study of thought forms and the feeling and meaning of various thought forms in meditation which one would see through his inner faculty. I began to know what a person was thinking about and his motivation for flowing awareness into that area of the mind where that collective thought substance occurred. My third catalyst also advanced me through the study of great beings who live in the inner areas of the mind, beings so developed in their nerve system that they no longer need the use of the physical body to function and communicate with humans. Similarly, I studied great beings who have physical bodies but function deep in meditation, helping those who meditate as a kind of spiritual mission. As a father and mother would oversee the emotional and physical maturation of their children, my third catalyst on the path had a thorough training in mysticism from a very early age with the American Indians in Nevada, and then with Swami Bhagawan Bisesar from the Himalayas, Yogi Hari Rama of the Benares League, and from the wonderful being I was about to meet on the island of Ceylon, my fourth catalyst on the path. All of this time I can't remember having asked many questions or entering into discussion. I do remember once, however, when I was a bit externalized and the subject matter was not quite clear to me, I did want to discuss it. I was cut very short with the statement, "There will be no discussion." I never did that again. When listening to inner teachings from a teacher who teaches in that way, if you miss a sentence or something is not quite clear, wait a few minutes, and on the playback the clarity will come from deep within yourself. I learned this at a very early age. This is the way mystics are trained. There is no discussion. There are no questions. There is plenty of help on the inside from great unfolded souls, helpers on the path, enabling us to do this. The San Francisco Ballet. At age 16, Robert entered the San Francisco Ballet School for an even more intensive training in classical dance. Within 2 years, he qualified himself as the premier danseur of the San Francisco Ballet Company, touring with them for 2 seasons throughout the United States and Canada. His training in yoga and meditation continued without a break. When in San Francisco, he would meditate 2 hours a day at the Presbyterian Church on Folsom Street, not far from the ballet company. This was one of America's most prestigious ballet companies, and the competition was tough. Robert worked hard at his craft, driving his body for many hours a day to gain the strength and stamina a performer at that level requires. He worked out with weights and could bench press 175 pounds at age 17, a necessity for lifting his partners aloft. Study, memorization, and practice, practice, practice. That was his day, his week, and month. To push his skills to their limit, he hired a trainer and asked him to critique his dance, quipping decades later, "I paid $20 an hour to have a man criticize me, not to point out what I was doing right, but what I was doing wrong." And that was when $20 was serious money. The company traveled, as entertainers do, mostly by bus and train. It was here, he later said, that he acquired his love of travel and his military precision in packing for a journey, which he could do in minutes. He performed at local theaters and entertained the troops at USO shows. America during these years was deeply immersed in World War II. The up-and-coming star ran with the best artists, no less than Ruth St. Denis, and William Christensen choreographed his work, and he danced on stage with Italian divas and American stars. He moved with fine singers and musicians, and teamed up with opera singer Althea Youngman. While the troupe was performing in Southern California, Robert took the opportunity to meet with one of the day's foremost gurus in America, Paramahansa Yogananda, at the Pacific Palisades Center of the Self-Realization Fellowship. Robert met the Indian teacher about the time he published Autobiography of a Yogi. Yogananda was kind, and on each of the teenager's 3 visits, thrust upon him an armful of literature and books. This was Robert's first direct encounter with the spiritual giants of the East. Dance demanded most of his time and effort, but at night he turned inward. The world retreated, and he meditated and studied the spiritual books he had, which were few. He was of a nature that mere reading was not rewarding. He would have to practice, explore, prove to himself the merits of what each teacher offered. That proved challenging when someone gave him a copy of a petite book by Patanjali, the Yoga Sutras. He dove into it, unraveling its arcane language, following its subtle directions, and practicing, as he had with the dance, the yoga disciplines described by the Indian yogi. It was his initiation on the yoga path and his first understanding of superconsciousness as seen by the Eastern masters. Dance was flourishing in the young artist's life. He loved the drama of it all, the sophistication, the social interaction, even the pomp and glitter. But dance was much more to him. It was a study of energy, of the mastery of life force, of how the spirit could move the material and thought could manifest action.